everyone. Welcome to the Passionate Workforce Podcast, the show that explores how leaders can build organizations where people love what they do and are inspired to give their best every day. I am your host, Nick Capman, President and CEO of the FDA Group and author of the #1 bestseller, The Passionate Workforce. In this podcast, we dive into real-world conversations with leaders, thinkers, and change makers who are shaping the future of work. So let us get started. Today, we are going to be talking about what are small companies losing when leaders misunderstand emotional safety, failing to recognize how everyday behaviors, false assumptions about employee well-being, and unsafe cultures quietly erode trust, engagement, and performance. So on as my guest today to help me discuss this is Nichole DiLoretta. Hey, Nichole, how are you doing?
Hi, I'm doing great.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you very much for being on the program. Before we begin, would you kindly introduce yourself?
Sure, yes. I'm happy to be here. So thanks for having me. I have spent about 20 years in the life sciences between quality and operations, multiple times running sites or being that buffer between executive management and our site leaders, even throughout the country at multiple sites as well. I've done some consulting on leadership and also very technical things, all the way down to very granular laboratory items and moving in construct and things like that. So, trying to play a few multiple roles, and each and every single one of them had some sort of aspect of leadership and the culture that they create. So,
Okay, awesome.
yes.
Well, I really like the topic for today. There's a story that pops in my head, and I think it's going to come out at some point in this podcast, but I'll wait for a proper introduction for that.
Okay.
Um, so let's start off with what does emotional safety mean in a workplace, and how is it different from being nice or overly permissive?
I think it's hard to define exactly what emotional safety is, but I think people could take the definition of nice versus kind as a really good introspect to what it means in a workplace. It's very different to be, being nice is often, in my opinion, is you are avoiding conflict and just trying to keep the peace. And it's a very sort of it's not very deep versus something that is someone as kind as understanding the empathy portion, the deep empathy, the deep knowledge behind why people feel the way that they feel. And I think in a workplace, you could really benefit from understanding the difference of those things. Being nice and overly permissive, it really doesn't solve problems. It just sort of covers them or makes it seem like you hope they go away. And instead of really getting to the root of all of it, I will probably say a few times throughout this conversation how communication I feel like it's the root of all of the problems in the world. And we all think we're better at it than we truly are. And so to me, being nice is someone maybe avoiding that conflict, avoiding the conversation that needs to happen in the communication. And no one feels safe when they can't communicate with someone and when they don't feel like they're understood, in my opinion.
Yeah, when I think of nice and kind, and this probably isn't the best example, but I'm going to use it anyway. If somebody, is getting ready for something important and they dress up and they're wearing something really crazy and wild and they say, "How do I look?" If you're being nice, nice, you'd say, "Oh, you're fine," and then they're going to go out and make a fool of themselves.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're being kind, you'd say, given, wearing a tutu to, an executive meeting, maybe not the best
Yeah.
idea,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yep.
So yeah, I think candor is certainly one direction that you and I are going. One thing that I also just wanted to add on to that as we continue with the discussion is there's a pyramid called Lencioni's pyramid, which says first you and your leadership team have to trust each other. And if you trust each other, then you can have conflict. And conflict doesn't mean necessarily arguing, but it does mean having a difference of opinion and being able to express that. And I think people that
Yeah.
don't feel emotional safety, those are the individuals that won't bring up important information because they don't want to look, they don't want the anticipated negative consequences, whatever
Yes.
that may
Yeah.
be, right?
Yeah, it becomes unfavorable. And I think trust is probably my number one answer for most of the questions around emotional safety for sure.
Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah.
What are the most common everyday leadership behaviors that unintentionally undermine emotional safety in small companies?
So I'll start with that, not trusting. You could be creating an environment that you think is trusting because you think that people are able to come to you. I have an open door policy, but do you really, if what is being said isn't believed, if what is being said isn't it's some mutual trust if what is being said is then maybe talked about later or becomes that there's a negative side effect to it. So I think not truly understanding what it means to trust your employees to do a good job. You hired them, you expected them to do a job with probably minimal oversight, especially in these small businesses, and then yet you're not trusting them to do that. And that's all aspects of a job. There is emotional parts to a job. There's personal parts to a job, whether we like it or not. People, we're humans, right? We come to work and we have personal lives. I think the other part is not believing people. I said that originally. You could be creating an environment where maybe people will actually speak up, but they may not be believed. I very often will reiterate to people, if someone tells you they're not trained, believe them. If someone tells you they don't understand something, believe them. Why would they bring something like that up? Why would they come to you and say, I don't feel comfortable doing this if they truly didn't? And yes, we're not talking about a very small percentage of the workforce that are maybe trying to get out of things. That's not what I want to concentrate on. But being believed in what you say, especially about yourself, is something that I believe that leadership could do really well at believing that. Um, I think thinking that you know how people feel when maybe that's not your best asset. In these small companies that I've worked with a lot of small companies, and I make the comparison that because someone is good as a bench scientist doesn't mean that they're a great manager. They're two very different skill sets, and I would apply that also to leadership in a small company. This person, they probably had a very specific skill set that they were wonderful at, that they're an expert at, which is great. I don't, we're not all experts in our fields. However, that doesn't mean that they all of a sudden knew all of the nuance of good leadership and emotional safety and all of those things. So, but they'll often think I have a pulse on the company. I know how people feel, and maybe that's really not a skill set that they ever really had. But all of a sudden, they think that they're really great at it. And I would say the last one, and this is hard for people to hear, I think, is you believe that everyone feels the same about the company as you do. And you're usually the owner or the CEO or both. And unfortunately, no one will probably ever care as much as you do. You hope to find those unicorns where they're like, I hope I help this company succeed, 100-fold, but it's just not true. This is still a
Mm.
job for them, and they still expect for you to help them as much as they are helping you. And I think, a lot of top executives in small companies don't go in realizing they're going to play a lot of different roles
Mm.
for their employees, and they're also expecting their employees to play a lot of different roles as well. So, yeah, I think that's some of the behaviors, and maybe they're more concepts, but those come out in behaviors of thinking that maybe a little bit more about how people feel about it, or they come in every day feeling that they want exactly the same success as you do, and really they want to come in. I believe everyone wants to come in and do a good job at work, but their livelihood and their whole life hasn't been put into this company, so it's just not the same.
Yeah. A couple points I want to touch on to complement what you said is the disbelief. I think there's I agree with everything that you said. There's also a shade that's a little bit lighter beyond right underneath disbelief. which is being dismissive.
Yes.
So to kind of take your example of the training, right? So maybe you have been trained, but you don't think it's sufficient,
Mhm.
right? I would say being dismissive. So you could say, yes, I was trained, but I'm just not feeling comfortable.
Yes. Mhm.
In which case you'll be fine.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So you listened to me, but you didn't hear me.
Yeah.
And that is, I think, if it's not equally as damaging, it's close. And I think it
Mhm.
certainly can lead to a place in the employee's mind where they say, well, if every time I go and express my thoughts on something, it's not going to be taken seriously, then I'm just banging my head against the wall. And that, I think, in turn leads to a lack of emotional safety, or which essentially, when we're talking about emotional safety, it means being candid and bringing things
Mhm.
up and being able to trust and have conflict. So I
Absolutely.
think that was something I wanted to add. The other thing, when you were talking about the president and CEO feeling like they have a good pulse on the mindset of the company. Um, and I think everybody that's listening to this in the life science industry can appreciate this, next statement, which is, there's no control without measurement. So if you're
Yes.
not
Yeah.
if you're not measuring the mindset of your
Mhm.
employees, you really don't know what's going on. And you might have a good vibe. You might actually be correct, but you don't know that until you validate it.
Mhm. Yep,
Yep.
I would agree. There are measurable steps that you can take instead of just asking.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. 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 Um, how do false assumptions about employees' well-being form, and why are they especially dangerous in fast-growing and resource constrained organizations?
So lending to kind of what I just said, I think those false assumptions, you could be asking your employees how do they feel about something and not realizing how you are influencing that question and the answer that you're getting. Especially, I often say at smaller companies, there's a lot of hallway conversations. I don't know why I say that, but there's this very important thing that happens in the hallway instead of something that needs to be documented, sit down. There needs to be some formality to it, and also the influence part of it. They asked someone how they're feeling about their job or the work they're doing, or do you like it here? And it's coming straight from the person that has control completely over their job and their job functions, and most likely they're gonna say they're fine.
Mhm.
And so I think then they have a false assumption that, well, they're being honest. They're telling me there's probably a little bias there too. I heard what I wanted to hear. I didn't dig any deeper. I
Mhm.
didn't get really anything measurable. I didn't get any examples, but I got the answer I wanted. And so now they have a false assumption that everybody loves it here. No one is quitting. No one is walking out the door actively right now. But they don't know that it, takes a long time to get a job, and they're probably, quiet quitting, and they're not going to announce that to everyone. And so I think that there's some false assumptions. Yeah, of I have a pulse on the company because I asked one person, or because there's not a mass exodus, things must be going really well, or people aren't coming to me and telling me negative things. But if the emotional safety isn't there, they're not going to anyway. So I think that those assumptions can really lead to a quick downfall. You may not see it as quickly, it's maybe not happening in a number of days, but a quick downfall with the culture. And I am a huge proponent that leadership is who creates the culture and the resentment. And if you have a false assumption about that, then you're not doing anything to change it. So, yeah, I think that those are the assumptions. I think understanding that they are maybe understanding or taking the action to be able to give people that outlet to, I hate to just say complain, but to voice their concerns, is also, there is an assumption we don't need to do that as a small company. I'm not required to have this position and maybe an HR position, or if they do, it's usually someone they know or a family member. And so there's this assumption that people will come to me. We don't need those trainings, or we don't need to manage that in other people. We don't need to have those expectations. We're just here, and everybody cares as much as I do, and we're just here to do a good job, without understanding that is a huge requirement for your employees, is to give them a safe work environment.
Yeah, I agree. Even when a company does have emotional safety, there's something that doesn't leave, which is the veil that is there between different levels of power.
Yeah.
So you could have the most emotionally safe company, and it doesn't matter. There is a veil between you and the person that you have firing power over
Yep.
that you might get close to 100% honesty, and maybe in some cases you will get that.
Yeah.
However, I would say that is rare
Mhm.
because there is, what is more important to the person speaking, to be 100% radically candid or to watch out for their family's financial safety,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
Um, so I think even within an emotionally safe environment, I think we all need, I think it's really important for people to understand there is that veil.
Yeah.
Um, Another thing I wanted to kind of compliment in terms of what you were discussing is you can't assume that people are going to come to you with problems,
Yeah.
and
Mhm.
and and you have to probe.
Mhm.
And for anybody, in the life science industry, especially in quality, right, we have to get to the root cause analysis. You got to peel
Yeah.
the onion,
Yeah.
you got to do the five whys, right? And
Yeah.
that's not just for deviations. That's, obviously that's for dealing with human capital. And
Mhm. Yep.
because here's the fact, or what I believe to be a fact, is by the time somebody comes to you, there has been a built-up frustration, and you use the word
Absolutely.
resentment, which I really appreciated, where if passion is here and resentment is here, they're pretty far close to resentment, or they're far enough away
Yeah.
from passion where the likelihood of them leaving and finding something that's different, I would say, is probably at an increased level than what you would find acceptable.
I agree.
So, I think it's important for us to say, look, I don't care if you don't like the flavor of the, coffee in the break room. If you don't like the color of my shirt, tell me,
Yep.
because
Yes.
it's a lot easier to deal with those issues when they're this big than to
Mhm.
deal with them when they're this big.
Yes, yeah, it's very hard to come back from resentment. I think in most personal relationships and in these really small companies, it is very personal. These are very personal conversations. Conflict is very personal. And yeah, so it's very hard to come back from that, in my opinion. Turning that around, to your point, versus catch it when it is happening, catch it at the beginning, and find ways to measure it aside from your opinion. Because once again, you're one person, your opinion of how someone feels. I hate to say it, but more often than not, I feel when I'm speaking maybe to some leaderships with a big disconnect is the opposite of maybe what piece of people with maybe a higher emotional IQ would say in that point. So just deciding that your take on this is the right take, and not having other input or insight is yeah, that's it. You're going to have a bias in what you come up with from all of that. Yeah.
Well, let's continue down that track. So,
Sure.
let's say somebody hasn't been probing sufficiently.
Uh-huh.
What are some of the early, often invisible signs that emotional safety is eroding before performance metrics begin to decline?
Um, so I think the biggest, and I'll even draw on my experience because I've been in emotionally unsafe environments. And the first thing that I think people stop doing is really just providing feedback or talking, just in general. If someone has big ideas, or you're sitting around and you're supposed to be discussing, something innovative, a lot of, we want to be doing things different. We want to be giving feedback. We want to be getting feedback from our employees, and people are quiet now, I think is probably the number one sign. So I've seen, you almost see that passion drain from them. I'm a very passionate person about certain things, and I love to find passionate people. And when I see them start to get quiet, that is my first indication that they do not feel safe. They don't feel like they can share their ideas because they're maybe shot down, or they are, mocked for it, or there's rumors, or it makes its rounds as to that, not being appropriate. I also think not just in the idea standpoint, but a lot of times we are, in these smaller companies, you're trusting people to come in and run things, a lot of things for you. And then if you hear them consistently talking about how other people did it wrong, and never giving, credit to anyone, I think that is really starts to erode emotional safety, and people will start getting quiet. They don't want to handle the things that they used to handle before, or they're not going to take the reins and run with something, because they see that actually nothing's going to be right. There's no pleasing people, or it's never, even the smallest mistake out of maybe 100 good things gets highlighted. I think that really erodes emotional safety. And I think that that's another reason that people start to get quiet in a different way, maybe not just not speaking up, but not taking on projects because they don't feel, not even that it would be appreciated, but that it would, if they make one small mistake, they won't be able to move on, and be successful for that person, I think is a big one that I see happen a lot. If your ideas after you leave, or after someone leaves, constantly get brought up as being silly or not working, then you start to be quiet because you don't want to be that person when you leave, right? I think that's a big one. I think sometimes it manifests a little bit different in people, that they might actually, the quiet people start talking back. So I think that's one we missed a little bit too. So people that hadn't talked a whole lot will start to maybe get, you can hear that resentment with them. They start maybe making comments. I've noticed that. All the way to people stop showing up. When someone calls in on a Monday consistently, I start thinking, what's going on with their happiness here? They don't want to be here. And I think one of my biggest goals since my very first job right out of college was making people want to work for me, and not having that mindset of, well, they can go somewhere else, because I know how expensive and hard it is to find good talent. And so I've never adopted that. And I don't understand that mindset of they
You
should be
had that
lucky to
right
be
out
here.
of college?
My very first job, I became the laboratory manager after about 6 months. And
Well,
so I got into leadership immediately.
that's
And
great.
was it, yeah,
I will tell
yeah,
you, I got so similar to you, I got promoted to manager in 11 months.
yeah.
I unfortunately wasn't as uh, mature in my leadership capacity, and definitely did probably more learning through trial and error than
Oh,
probably you.
absolutely. Yeah, no, I would say I make the comment, I had really good examples of what not to do.
Hmm.
And I definitely made mistakes. And of course I still, 20 years later, I'm still kind of thinking about, I wish I had done that differently. We have to give ourselves grace, right?
Hmm.
And give, our employees and bosses grace. But yeah, I immediately went into leadership and started realizing, a lot of this is emotional support,
Hmm.
and half of it is the actual work that they're doing. And so I caught on to that really quick, and it's actually what I really love about leadership. That's the part that I like the most. I'm a science nerd. Being in micro, and I've run a lot of analytical chemistry labs and done manufacturing, done a lot of different things. But the people part of it to me is fascinating. And so, yeah, I immediately was like, I better get good at this. So, yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. So, and then the last one, just to not take away too much of that, is really, I think that people, even as a group, you'll start seeing maybe you have your leadership, and then you start seeing this huge gap between leadership and people and their ideas. And it goes a little bit along with people becoming quiet and not speaking up, but I'll often see people where we were all individual contributors and working with our leadership, all of a sudden sort of have their own thing going on that they're working towards. I've noticed that as well. And that's kind of that hive mentality of none of us really feel safe. So we're going to be over here in a group of safety where we feel supported by our peers. And you start seeing a really big gap between the leadership and your employees. And that is another one that I've definitely noticed as well.
Yeah.
It's a little bit harder to see. You really do need to be in tune with your employees and not kind of from this, this tower looking down. But I definitely will see that a lot too, where I start seeing people who maybe never even really collaborated all of a sudden, or the whole group is kind of together and not feeling supported.
Yeah. We've been spending a lot of time talking about employees, making sure they feel safe. If, what are the signs that they might not feel safe? And one thing that we haven't gotten into that I'd like to get into now is I think in every organization we've got the A+ player. We're connected, everything's going good. They're a high performer. I don't have to put a lot of maintenance effort into
Mhm.
that person, but I think if sometimes we take our eye off of those individuals and put too much time toward everyone else, those high performers, the low maintenance people can suffer too. So could you speak on that?
Sure, I think they absorb a very high amount of hidden workload, and they might tend to be that person that people come to. You are a neutral ground, you don't speak up a lot. I need to know your opinion. Am I crazy for thinking this? So you'll have your employees often go to them, and that's a workload they did not sign up for, especially if they're not a leader. But they definitely start taking on a lot of that hidden workload. They will quietly take it on, they won't say a whole lot, and they definitely start feeling the not supported, even deeper maybe than they did before. Maybe they want to come in and kind of not cause a lot of ruckus, and they want to kind of. I tend to describe myself as that, like, let me just go do my job in the corner and I'm good. But I definitely start noticing the tension around me. I definitely start noticing that other people are unhappy, and then I feel a little bit like it's my job to correct that. So that's what I was speaking about before with the hidden workload. They will hide their struggle often because we already
Mhm.
know that they don't cause a lot of issues, a lot of tension. So they'll hide that, and that struggle is happening internally, or they're thinking about it when they go home. They're taking a lot of that into their personal life, I think. And then still exactly the same thing, that whether they were struggling or not, or this was a emotionally safe place or not, they will tend to not be supported by their bosses as well. They're not checking on them. They're like, oh, they're fine, they're good to go, we don't have to worry about that person. And I understand, I've probably been guilty of this as well, like, gosh, it's so nice to have that person come in and not have anything to work, but we're all struggling a little bit somehow, right? Even if they're totally fine coming in, taking on extra work, doing everything, taking on the tension, taking on a lot of that emotional part of it. They still need to be checked on, and they're probably seeing things from a different perspective, which is what all of this comes down to. Seeing things from other people's perspective and that empathy. I think that they maybe see that honesty is being punished, or that speaking up is being met with something unfavorable, and so they will retreat even more. So you'll see them hide even more, in my opinion, and they'll still do the work. They're good workers, but I feel like they're going to retreat and say even less than they did before. Is what I've noticed in my experience.
I have a question for you. So let's say
Sure.
we have an emotionally safe company,
Mhm.
okay? But there is a person that you semi-described, which is, the high performer, the low maintenance person. Oftentimes I've seen them be kind of the organizational psychologist, right?
Yeah.
You said, they go to that person first.
Mhm.
And that often can be a burden, but they accept that burden, but it can
Mhm.
be draining. So, let's say there's somebody and they're like, oh, this is a great podcast, but I've got an emotionally safe company. Now all of a sudden we're talking about somebody that they rely on, which is that company psychologist. And And they're the ones that are kind of fielding a lot of these issues, which they help to resolve. But it's not a core aspect of their business because maybe they're dealing with people that report to them, but typically it's people outside of their direct
Yep.
reporting that are coming to them with their issues. So speak to that.
Yeah, I think I'll speak a little bit to how I think we can combat that.
But you
It
think it
is
needs to
leader.
be combated.
I do think it does need to be combated because eventually our cup always runs over, right? You could be a great company and a great employee, and if you feel like other leadership is not stepping up to some of these things, I do think most people eventually will come to the conclusion like, I can't take this. It is a lot to take on other people's emotional, the burden of other people's emotional state. I mean, you see very highly emotional jobs with people in social work and vets and those kind of areas where people have that emotional burnout,
Mm,
and so they're maybe fine with the workload that they're getting and they're maybe wonderful at it and they're maybe praised for that, but that is the hidden workload that they are getting,
right.
is this emotional part of it, and and if they're not a leader. So I think one thing I have noticed is training my leadership to understand those things. It is I this may not be a fun opinion for people, but as leaders, we are supposed to learn these things. We are supposed to learn how to manage people and how to make them want to work for us and how to deal with conflict and how to support our employees. I hear often like that's not my job, or they're bringing stuff into work, but that is part of leadership. And I think looking around some of these small and mid-sized companies and saying, is their leader, is their manager seeing this, that they're taking a lot of that on? Are they aware of the environment? We should all be aware of our surroundings. And I think training our management to see those things and then try to step in and say, hey, once again, let's communicate that I see this is happening and I'm going to try to make steps to, make it better. And then being that person and trying to step in. If you don't have that skill set, I'm not sure that you should be in leadership. If you can't step in and say, hey, I see that things are going on, and you're always going to this person, or maybe not saying it so specifically like that, but noticing that that's happening, like, let's talk about how we can make this better, because actually the leader is the one who probably has the authority to make it better,
Mm.
not the person that's sitting there absorbing it constantly, who maybe doesn't have decision making authority there. So I really think a big part of it is someone at your company needs to be in charge of this, and then they need to make sure that their management is seeing it too. If you don't have those layers, or you don't have people at your company that have some sort of pulse on the employees, I just feel like you're going to have constant turnover or constant a toxic workplace. So I think it's really important to train our leaders and expect that from them. That really is part of our jobs as leaders, is to see what is going on, and that person's taking on a lot of burden. People are always going to them, I need to step in, or their manager needs to step in. And if you have HR, great, then HR can step in. Not a lot of small companies do. So I think first acknowledge it. That goes a long way. If someone's taking on that burden, if you acknowledge it, that goes a long way. And then coming up with a solution for that. It can happen. It's not perfect. It's not black and white. I never talk in, I know there's so much nuance in gray areas, and it's not as easy as just say this and this will happen, but it can be worked through. And I think that you can hold on to those people if you acknowledge that they're doing all of this, hidden labor.
So what I'm hearing is for the company psychologist, making sure that the people that aren't directly reporting to them understand that if there's an HR department, that's really the most appropriate place.
Mhm.
You said
Yeah,
some
yeah.
companies aren't big enough to have an HR department. So in the case where there's a company that doesn't have an HR department and they have a company psychologist, I will say the company psychologist, yes, oftentimes in what we're talking about in terms of this conversation is business related issues, but they deal with personal issues too.
Mhm.
Somebody's
Yep.
going through a divorce.
Yep.
Joe keeps calling me and telling me about his divorce, like I
Yep.
can't anymore. Or
Yeah.
somebody's got a drinking problem,
Yep.
and like I can explain things to you, but I can't understand them for you, right?
Yep.
So for the company that doesn't have an HR department, what would you recommend leadership do in order to relieve the burden of the company psychologist?
I think, and it does go back to my comment that it is our job as leaders to be hyper aware. It is our job as business owners. If you don't have someone there, you need to go perfect that skill. I do think that, say you have a really small 8 to 10 person company and you have that person and they're getting, overwhelmed, it's your job. I really truly think it is. And if it's your job to recognize if maybe you're not good at it and go get the training, there is metrics, there are ways to survey people to get a real pulse on things. I know that it means having a lot of humility and you really have to kind of take a step back and say, I'm not good at that. I'm not good at this. So that's not always easy for people, but in my opinion, it is their job then to decide I'm going to step up. I'm going to figure out how, even if it's having an outside company come once a month or once a week and you try to do some leadership training or try to do some training on how people, including yourself, can do better at these things. I think it's not super expensive to have outside consultants for a short amount of time. There's fractional positions that you can have, come in and do those things if you recognize you're not great at it. I think that's a big hurdle. Some people think they're better at it than they are, and they do the hallway conversation, and everything's fine, right? But if you truly are seeing that, and you don't have multiple layers of leadership, or you don't have that person, I really truly believe it's their job. You are running a company. You need to be hyper aware of these issues that are going on, and you can't just bury your head in the sand. You can, but I think the outcome is going to be that you're losing good people. You're losing being able to empower your teams. I really wholeheartedly believe, believing people, empowering people, that they can do a good job and that they have your support and they have your trust goes a really long way. And then maybe if they feel better at work, the outside problems aren't bleeding in as much. There's so many avenues they can. I'm not expecting people, especially when you get metrics back and you do the surveys and you actually listen and believe what people are saying instead of, I see people do surveys and say, oh, this of course this person would say that, or I know who said that, and you completely dismiss it immediately, right? Instead of just, maybe have
Yeah,
a little bit of insight and think
it's funny because
maybe
it's
they're right.
true.
Yeah, yes, right. I've been on that side. Yeah. And so really taking what they have to say with, I have to believe this. They are writing it down. I have to take this. And then trying to find action. You don't have to sell that. Let's say you survey 20 people. You don't need to fix all 20 problems. I bet mostly they're rooted psychologically in some similar area, and try to fix one thing at a time. And if you can't do that as a leader, then you need to get someone in there to be a thought leader, in my opinion.
I'm going to ask you a tough question, or
Okay,
at
love
least
that.
I perceive it to be I perceive it to be a tough question.
Okay,
Um, Not every complaint is valid.
true. That is very true.
So let's say, because it popped in my head like, oh, you sent out a survey and up that somebody said,
Mhm.
oh, I know who that is,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
Right.
I'm done with that
Now, now,
already.
now,
Yeah.
now let's say the leader is a good leader. They've got an emotional company.
Mhm,
But and we need to believe what people are saying and listen and all that stuff. But there is a limit to everything.
mhm,
And some complaints aren't valid, right?
mhm.
I think this might be a little bit of a deviation from, the concept of emotional safety, but how would you, for the listeners, what would you say to them in those instances where they want to take all your advice, but they know that there is a limit? How
Yeah,
would you
yeah.
comment on that?
Well, I think this is gonna make you chuckle in it because it's exactly the opposite of all of the advice that I have given so far, which is don't believe the first thing that you hear.
Mm,
And I'm saying believe them when they say these things. A very pointed, I am not trained well. Why would someone say that? But
mm,
if this is emotionally charged, it's personal, it's about how they feel a situation happened, not how they feel, but how
mm,
their perspective of a situation happened. um, it is really important to understand there's probably 10 sides to every story, not
Mhm.
two, or not even the mine, yours, and the truth. There really is that understanding, getting that pulse on your company, getting a pulse on people, and really, and it's a little bit investigative. It's a little bit of being a detective. Like, did this thing really happen, or do they have a point here? And it's never going to come from one person or two people. You're probably going to have to get a little bit creative in how do I get to the root of what really happened. And so yeah, it's the not, don't take exactly what they said and this is what they're complaining about. And it also goes back to, sitting on a call. I used to not understand, like a customer would be asking a question, but they weren't really asking the question that they were asking. There was some outside, what they really want to hear, what they're really asking, and not everybody's good at deciphering that. And so that's why I say you need to either hone those skills or get someone that's good at understanding that not everything is a valid complaint, not everyone's opinion is valid on a situation. And of course, I've been at companies, they've had layoffs and people are upset. Well, why didn't we know? Well, of course you can't go tell everybody that something like that is going to happen. And understanding the business aspect of that, people will leave, we're not exactly sure yet. You don't want to get that kind of stuff
That would
out.
be an
um
interesting conversation. Hey,
yes, oh
everybody,
yeah.
we're thinking about firing a
Yes,
big
yeah,
portion of the company,
everybody.
but we're not sure yet.
Yes, and see what happens to your morale and your productivity. And yeah, but I also, having some pretty increased sympathy, I do understand why they're saying that, where they're coming from. Like, this would have been good to know. So I think having that, some increased sympathy, having that idea that from their perspective, this may be true to them, but it's not necessarily true to the situation, and really kind of trying to get that investigative side, and not, there really are, I'm not going to believe the first complaint that I hear about this, but I'm going to start collecting interesting insight, and maybe probing a couple of other people that are close to this as well, and see what their perspective was, and making an informed decision about something like that. And you're not going to get it right every time, because there are emotions to this, and it's not, prescriptive like other things, and it's very subjective. But I really think trying to learn the different sides, get other people's perspective, use your own perspective, use your background, use the bad examples that you've had in life, the good examples, and really kind of coming to that answer, will help you decide whether that is valid or not. Because there are those really not valid, or we don't get free lunches every day, just things like that. That's like, okay. And also, it's okay to communicate with people when they have those invalid, what you consider to be invalid. I think sitting down and talking to people and saying, well, here's why. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about it as a group. We expect small companies to all, do things as a group and do things in these big environments, but then avoid these conversations, whether they're silly or not. Go ahead and have a conversation, and then maybe they'll never bring it up again. Maybe
Okay.
you'll get lucky. Yeah.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So I'll tell my story and then I got a question for you.
Okay.
So,
Okay. Sure.
we had a former employee. They were interviewing, they asked us to be a reference, which we were. And the company asked to do a reference check, which I agreed to. And and here's the truth. For me is I speak the truth when I do a reference call.
Uh-huh.
Right?
I do too. Yeah.
Okay. And so and so my priority is to be as transparent as I can, right? And not withhold information. So that's how I do my reference calls.
Sure.
So they said, well, what are some of the bad things or things we need to be concerned about, and so on and so forth. And I said, well, this particular individual, he's a little paranoid. He always, more so than normal, is kind of always concerned about job security, right? And so just something to, just a
Think
fact,
about.
just something you
Hmm.
notice. It's just kind of
Hmm.
in the ether, so on and so forth. And there was the CEO and the head of HR, and this is for a sales position.
Okay.
And the head of HR said, "Oh, well, that's a good thing if they are constantly in fear of their job, because then they'll work harder." Uh, eh. Wrong
Yeah.
answer.
Yeah, that is not what motivates people. Yeah,
Other
yeah.
team to the
No.
steel, you know, like
Yeah.
no, that's wrong. So,
Uh-huh.
let me transition from that odd story to a relevant question, which is, all right, we're talking
Sure.
about emotional safety. Give me what are the tangible costs to innovation, decision making, retention? What is the tangible cost in an unsafe, in emotionally or emotionally unsafe environment?
Yeah, environments. Yeah, I think just in I love this topic and I could talk about it all day. I won't bore you, but there are tangible and then there's the maybe some of the hidden, costs and hidden maybe on to people that are not getting into the HR, the turnover. We know it's more expensive to have to replace someone than to keep someone there. And maybe to the workforce that is hidden, but HR and your CFOs know that for sure. I think the innovation, it really is a big one. If people don't feel empowered, they're not going to come up with ideas. And I wholeheartedly believe that diversity and background is some of the best innovation that you'll get in a company. If you all came from the same place before, you're all
Mm.
going to do it the same way that you've always done it. So I love to get people that have maybe even been in different industries
Oh yeah,
sometimes, depending upon the role. Just
definitely.
I'd love to get your feedback on things. And
Yeah.
so knowing that that increases our innovation, then knowing when no one is giving feedback is just to me the obvious, that you are missing out so much on people's experience. We all have something we've been good at. We all have something that we've seen that has worked and that hasn't worked. um,
And
and I
that experience allows you to miss pitfalls.
Yes, it does. Yes. And doing it as a group and once again trusting that people know what they're talking about and if they're providing some insight into something. I was actually reading an article in MIT, the Sloan, their School of Management, that there is a 25% above yearly targets for people who take actual measurable steps towards discussion of emotional safety. And that can be training, that can be just having dialogue as a group, having that sort of empowerment and that real open environment for people to talk. Why wouldn't you want a 25% increase? And that was what your target was, so who knows
Mm.
what it comparable to previously. And I think that that's really important. I also know that when looking for jobs, when looking for talent, another statistic there, 90% of the workforce, it was something like 85 to 95, so I'll say 90%, is saying that their uh, work life balance or blend, and that is a big part of emotional safety, being able to work well in what you do and on your somewhat on your terms. Was 90% said that was their top reason for staying or taking a job at a company.
Mm.
And they feel emotionally supported. They feel like if they work from home and they give extra hours later, but then maybe during the day they get up and do laundry after a call, who cares? You're
Mm.
probably getting the best out of them in that case. And so when they felt recognized in that, they felt emotionally safe and they would stay at jobs or take a job. And I think that that is really important. I know in my personal experience and the people that I've been around, I've watched a lot of people grow in their careers over time. A lot of people that started with me as technicians or as supervisors and they're directors in their career, and they care wholeheartedly about what that blend of work life is, and they would stay at or take a position based on that. So it's not just numbers. I hear that feedback, and it's really important for us. I want to do things challenging, but I definitely don't want to just kind of be put in a box and this is exactly how I work, so I know you need to work exactly that way. That's another part of feeling a bit unsafe in the work environment is not being able to do it the way that you work best. And so I think you lose people, you burn them out, you lose their ideas, and our ideas at work are number one, right? No matter what you're talking about. If people don't want to give feedback, you've got maybe one or two dictators there that are running everything, and I just doesn't it's not a successful model, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So Yeah.
So let's say if somebody's listened to this podcast up to this point, my guess is that they're subscribing to our thoughts and our ideas, right?
Hmm. Sure.
What would you say as we kind of wrap things up? What would you say are 2 to 3 practical uh, changes that leaders can make relatively quickly to start building back some of that emotional safety and trust?
Yeah, I would 100% start with communication. I think sitting down and having an open dialogue and admitting maybe this hasn't, maybe we haven't been approaching this appropriately, and having that humility to say we want to make a change and what are some of your ideas. So going right back to that diversity and ideas and innovation. Innovation isn't always, a producible product. Maybe it is the product of, making some changes at work. And so getting people's ideas. So communication is number one. So sitting down, admitting maybe we do need to make a couple of changes is important. And I think that I guarantee your staff will go home thinking, wow, they actually want to listen. That training that I mentioned, there is a lot you can learn, maybe self-help books and training, and maybe they reiterate things over and over, and some people don't find them to be helpful, but it brings it to light. It reminds you that this is a problem. It reminds you of ways to solve it. So you might know in the back of your mind some of the ways to approach things, but it gets lost in all of the craziness, especially at a small company. You've got a lot of projects, you've got a lot of things going on. You put that on the back burner. Training or having people come in and do leadership training, or coming in and trying to open up the communication for you if you realize that you're not good at it, will bring those things back to the front of your mind and not let you forget them. Because I think some people are like, oh, I know how to do that, but are you practicing it? It makes you practice it. So I think that is a good idea to have some part of the budget to have people come in and give some insight and look into that company, and what the actual real pulse is. And then on the other side, if you really can't do that, I do think it's important to ask for feedback in an anonymous way. Ask them some pointed questions. Just don't say, how do you feel every day? Or don't say, give
Hmm.
me feedback. Have actual pointed questions that you're asking, about, and do you have ideas on how to make this better? How do you feel about this? How is the communication here? Do
Hmm.
you truly feel like we have an open door policy? Do you feel safe? Do you feel supported in your ideas? And what can we do better? And listen to what they have to say. I think those are really quick turnarounds that a company can make if they're willing to see that they're having problems. I think that's the first thing.
Yeah,
Don't be in denial about it.
yeah, quick turnarounds. The other thing I would say is can't believe this popped in my head, but the movie What About Bob? If you remember, he was reading the book Baby Steps.
Uh-huh.
Um,
Yep.
so,
Yeah.
so there is some things you can do in order to kind of maximize immediate improvements, but it really is a journey that never ends.
Yeah.
In order to and every leader here understands the difference of 1%.
Mhm.
So
Yep.
just constantly setting up a structure so that you're holding yourself accountable in order
Mhm.
to optimize the outcome of emotional safety, because you mentioned some of the tangible um, issues that can arise when you say we're too busy to deal with it.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
can really be financially destructive to an organization. So
Yeah. Yeah. Why not try to be more successful, right? Why not try, especially of your own company?
yeah, that's why
Yeah.
we're here. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
awesome. Well, Nichole, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate your insights. And for everybody listening, as always, if today's conversation resonated with you, please share it with a colleague or a leader who's passionate about building a stronger, more inspired team. Don't forget to subscribe at thefdagroup.com/podcast for new episodes, and follow the FDA Group on LinkedIn for ongoing insights about leadership, culture, and workforce excellence. To dive deeper into these ideas, please pick up my book, The Passionate Workforce, available wherever books are sold. Until next time, keep leading with purpose and keep building a passionate workforce.